At 07:42 hours on April 15, 1943, over the French countryside near Lille, a B-17F flying Fortress designated 42577 cut through morning fog at 20,000 feet, engines straining against thin air. Inside the belly turret, Staff Sergeant George H. Sutherland gripped twin .50 caliber controls, palms slick despite the -15-degree cold. The Pratt & Whitney engine's familiar drone fractured, distant but closing, the high-pitched whine of Daimler-Benz DB605 engines. Messerschmitt Bf 109Gs closing at 300 miles per hour. The first tracer rounds snapped past, orange streaks against grey, puncturing aluminum skin with metallic pops. Contact, 9 o'clock high, Sutherland transmitted, voice steady. His mission brief had been clear: defend the formation during the bomb run on the Erla Maschinenwerk plant. But in the next 4 minutes, Sutherland would violate every defensive gunnery doctrine in the Army Air Force's manual. The tactic would be deemed reckless, suicidal even. It would also save his crew and revolutionize bomber defense doctrine for the remainder of the war. The pre-dawn briefing at RAF Molesworth had begun at 05:15 hours, April 15, 1943. 36 B-17 flying fortresses of the 303rd Bombardment Group stood on hardstands, propellers motionless in the English drizzle. Staff Sergeant George H. Sutherland, 29 years old, from Billings, Montana, sat among 200 airmen in a Nissen hut that smelled of aviation fuel and wet wool. The target photograph showed the Erla Maschinenwerk aircraft factory in Lille, France, a facility producing 12 Bf-109s monthly, according to intelligence estimates. Mission Commander Lieutenant Colonel William M. Reed traced the route with a wooden pointer. Departure at 06:45, rendezvous over the Channel at 07:20, bomb release at 08:40, expected opposition heavy. Sutherland adjusted his fleece-lined jacket and watched condensation streak the briefing room windows. This would be his 23rd combat sortie. The 303rd had lost 4 aircraft the previous week, 14% attrition rate, higher than the sustainable 8% threshold War Department analysts considered acceptable. Sutherland had joined his crew, piloted by First Lieutenant Robert Morgan, in February. They called their aircraft Memphis Belle, though official records listed only the tail number. As crews dispersed to their bombers, the sky remained slate grey, visibility 3 miles. Sutherland climbed through the belly hatch at 06:30, settling into the Sperry Ball turret, a cramped sphere of plexiglass and steel, barely 4 feet in diameter. He checked the twin Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, each belt holding 250 rounds of M2 ball ammunition, mixed with every 5th round a tracer. The hydraulic motors hummed as he tested the turret's rotation. Through the curved glass, he watched ground crews pull wheel chocks. At 06:47, engines coughed to life and the bomber rolled toward the runway. Over the English Channel at 07:25 hours, 36 B-17s assembled into a combat box formation, a 3-dimensional defensive array designed by 8 bomber command tacticians. Sutherland's bomber flew in the low squadron, port side, altitude 18,000 feet. Through his turret glass, he counted aircraft, 12 in the lead squadron, 12 high, 12 low. The formation stretched across 2 miles of sky, each bomber positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Temperature at altitude, -20 degrees Celsius. Sutherland wore an electrically heated suit, the wires stiff against his skin, but his breath still fogged the glass. He wiped it with a chamois cloth kept in his jacket. Radio discipline held, only essential transmissions. The channel below appeared as grey wrinkled fabric, occasional whitecaps visible through breaks in cloud. At 07:48, the formation crossed the French coast near Dunkirk. Flak began immediately. Black puffs at 19,000 feet, German 80mm guns tracking their course. The bombers held formation. Sutherland rotated his turret, scanning quadrants. Doctrine called for constant vigilance. Belly gunners covered the 6 o'clock low position, the most vulnerable approach angle. Luftwaffe pilots had learned that American defensive fire concentrated on beam and tail positions, leaving the underbelly less protected during certain maneuvers. At 0803, the first fighter contact crackled over intercom. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, 4+. Sutherland craned his neck, spotting black specks descending from 25,000 feet. Bf 109G6 fighters from Jägerschwader 26, though he wouldn't learn that designation until debriefing. The specks grew, became crosses, became aircraft with yellow-nosed spinners and mottled grey-green camouflage. They split into pairs, setting up for coordinated attacks. Sutherland's pulse accelerated, but his hands remained steady on the gun grips. He'd been trained at Harlingen Aerial Gunnery School, Texas, firing at towed sleeves and moving truck targets. This was different. These targets fired back. The first Bf 109 made its pass at 0807 hours, diving from the lead squadron towards Sutherland's bomber at a 30-degree angle. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine: approach from above and ahead, fire a 2-second burst, break away below the formation. Sutherland tracked the fighter through his sight reticle, a simple ring and post, calculating deflection. The Bf 109's wings lit up with muzzle flashes. Sutherland heard the impacts, sharp cracks as 20mm cannon shells punched through aluminum somewhere above him. He squeezed both triggers. The twin .50 calibers roared, vibration rattling his teeth, spent casings ejecting into a collection bag. His tracer rounds arced out but fell behind the target. The Bf 109 flashed past, rolling inverted as it dove away. Sutherland rotated the turret, searching for the next threat. The intercom erupted with overlapping calls. 12 o'clock level. Brake right. Got one smoking. Then the co-pilot's voice strained. Hole in number 3 engine cowling. Oil pressure dropping. Sutherland glanced up through the turret glass. Black smoke streamed from the inboard starboard engine. The propeller continued windmilling, but the RPM gauge would be falling on the pilot's panel. Lieutenant Morgan's voice came through, calm despite the circumstances. Feathering number 3, holding formation. A B-17 could fly on 3 engines, even 2, but performance degraded with each loss. Airspeed would decrease, making them more vulnerable. Another Bf 109 approached from 5 o'clock low, exactly the angle Sutherland was positioned to defend. He swung the turret, leading the target. This fighter came fast, nose pointed directly at the bomber's tail section. Sutherland fired a 3-second burst. The Bf 109 didn't break off. It closed to 400 yards, 300, still firing. Then, abruptly, it rolled left and dove away, trailing white coolant vapor. Possibly a hit, possibly evasive maneuvering. Sutherland couldn't confirm. The combat report would list it as damaged, unconfirmed. What mattered was the bomber remained airborne. Barely. At 0818 hours, 15 miles from the target, the Luftwaffe attacks intensified. Sutherland counted 8 Bf 109s circling the formation like wolves, testing a herd. His ammunition counter showed 180 rounds remaining per gun. The hydraulic fluid in the turret system had warmed enough for smooth rotation, but his legs cramped in the confined space. He shifted weight, pointless in the fetal position the turret required. Another bomber in the formation, tail number 425271, Yankee Doodle, had dropped back with one engine feathered, trailing the formation by a quarter mile. Sutherland watched 2 Bf 109s peel off to attack the straggler. He couldn't help them. Each gunner defended his assigned sector. The bomber shuddered as Lieutenant Morgan threw it into evasive maneuvers, slight altitude changes, heading variations, enough to complicate enemy gunnery without breaking formation integrity. Through the intercom, Sutherland heard the navigator's update. 8 minutes to IP, turning to bomb heading in 3 minutes. The initial point, where the formation would make its final turn toward the target and fly straight and level for the bomb run. The most vulnerable phase, Luftwaffe pilots knew it too. At 0821, Sutherland noticed something irregular. A lone Bf-109 had climbed to 23,000 feet, positioning itself directly in front of the formation, not above, not to the side, dead ahead, slightly low. The fighter nosed over, entering a shallow dive that would bring it head-on to the lead bomber. Sutherland had never seen this attack profile. Gunnery school taught that frontal attacks were rare. High closing speeds made accurate fire difficult for both sides, and the Bf-109 pilot faced the combined firepower of multiple nose, top turret, and chin turret guns. Yet here it came, wings level, steady. Sutherland rotated his turret forward as far as the mechanical stops allowed, roughly 40 degrees off the bomber's nose. His firing arc couldn't cover a pure head-on approach. The top turret and chin turret gunners would handle it, or so Doctrine said. The Bf-109 closed at a combined speed exceeding 500 miles per hour. Sutherland watched through the turret's forward glass as the nose guns of the lead bomber opened fire. Bright flashes, tracer streams converging. The Bf-109 flew through them, still coming. At 600 yards it fired. A stream of 20mm cannon rounds and 13mm machine gun bullets walked across the lead bomber's nose. The plexiglass shattered. The bomber nosed down sharply. Wounded, the Bf-109 pulled up at the last second, clearing the formation by mere feet. So close Sutherland glimpsed the pilot's helmet. Then it was gone, diving away inverted. The lead bomber fell out of formation, spiraling toward broken clouds below. Sutherland saw 3 parachutes blossom, white silk against grey sky. The deputy lead bomber moved forward to assume command. The formation tightened. At 0824, another Bf-109 set up for the same attack. High, forward, diving straight at the formation. This one targeted the bomber to Sutherland's right. Again the head-on approach. Again the convergence of defensive fire. This time the Bf-109's left wing crumpled mid-approach, shedding fragments. The fighter cartwheeled, spinning into the clouds. But the tactic had proven effective. 2 attacks, 1 bomber down, 1 fighter lost. The exchange rate favoured the Germans. Sutherland's mind raced. The belly turret traditionally covered the vulnerable underside. 6 o'clock low, 7 o'clock low, 5 o'clock low, but these head-on attacks came from 12 o'clock level, outside his normal engagement envelope. Unless he studied the turret's firing arc, maximum elevation, 70 degrees, maximum rotation, beyond 90 degrees to either side. If he rotated the turret fully forward and elevated the guns, could he engage a head-on attacker from below? The geometry was marginal. The bomber's fuselage blocked most forward sight lines from the belly position. But there might be a sliver of space, a narrow cone of fire angling upward and forward. Doctrine said belly gunners didn't shoot forward. Doctrine hadn't anticipated this attack method. Sutherland keyed the intercom. Pilot, this is ball turret. Permission to engage forward targets. Lieutenant Morgan's response came immediately, tension beneath the professional tone. Ball turret? Clarify. Forward targets? Sutherland chose his words carefully, aware that 9 other crew members listened. Sir, these head-on attacks are chewing us up. I can rotate the turret forward, elevate guns, catch them from below as they pull up. It's outside standard procedure, but the angle exists. A pause, 2 seconds of static. The bomber rattled as flak burst nearby, shrapnel pinging against aluminum. Then, ball turret, approved, call your shots. At 0826, Sutherland rotated the turret to its forward stop. elevated the guns to 65 degrees. Through the curved plexiglass, he had a restricted view, mostly the bomber's nose section, but a narrow wedge of sky beyond. He braced himself, legs pressed against the turret frame, his neck bent at an awkward angle to peer through the sight. Another Bf-109 appeared, 2,000 yards out, 12 o'clock high, beginning its dive. Sutherland tracked it, fingers resting on the triggers. The closing speed was enormous. The fighter dove at 400 miles per hour, the bomber advanced at 180. Less than 4 seconds from visual acquisition to firing window. The Bf-109's wings flickered with muzzle flashes. Sutherland saw tracer rounds stream toward the formation. Nose guns from multiple bombers returned fire, creating a lethal corridor. The fighter pushed through. At 300 yards, it began pulling up from the dive. That was the moment. The split second, when the Bf-109 transitioned from attack to escape, nose rising, belly exposed. Sutherland fired. The turret vibrated violently, brass casings rattling in the collection bag. He walked the tracers onto the target, instinct and training merging. The stream of 50 caliber rounds intersected the Bf-109's underside. He saw strikes, white flashes against dark metal. The fighter's nose pitched up further. Too far, beyond controlled flight. Black smoke erupted from the engine cowling. The Bf-109 stalled, snap-rolled left, and fell away spinning. Sutherland's ammunition counter showed 98 rounds remaining. His hands shook. On the intercom, the top turret gunner spoke, voice tinged with disbelief. "Ball turret, I saw that. Confirm one bandit destroyed." At 08:29 hours, the formation reached the initial point. The bombardier's voice came through. "Bomb bay doors open. I have the aircraft." Lieutenant Morgan relinquished control. For the next 6 minutes, the bomber would fly straight and level, while the Norden bomb site calculated the release point. No evasive maneuvers. Perfect predictability. Perfect vulnerability. Sutherland rotated the turret, scanning for threats. His neck ached from the unnatural angle required to fire forward. 2 more Bf-109s had climbed to attack position, circling above the formation like hawks. They'd observed their wingman's destruction. Would they repeat the tactic or adapt? The first fighter rolled into its dive at 08:31. This time the angle was steeper, almost vertical, targeting the high squadron. Sutherland couldn't engage. The bomber above blocked his line of fire. He watched the attack develop. The Bf-109 came straight down, fired a burst, pulled through, no hits. The second fighter followed immediately, but offset slightly, attacking from 11 o'clock instead of 12. Adapting, learning. Sutherland rotated his turret left, compensating for the angle. The Bf-109 dove, flattening out at the formation's altitude, approaching in a shallow climb. Unconventional. The fighter's pilot had realized that pulling up gave Sutherland a firing opportunity, so he approached level, planning to break down. Sutherland adjusted his aim point. Instead of waiting for the pull-up, he fired as the fighter entered range. Still level, leading the target by 3 aircraft lengths, accounting for deflection. The burst lasted 2 seconds, 40 rounds. The Bf-109 shuddered, pieces separating from its right wing. It tried to brake, rolling left, but the roll became a tumble. The fighter spiraled into clouds below, trailing debris. Sutherland's ammunition counter blinked. 41 rounds remaining. He keyed the intercom. Low on ammo, conserving for close threats. The bombardier's voice, calm and focused. 30 seconds to release. Below, through gaps in clouds, Sutherland saw the Erla factory. Rectangular buildings, rail lines, smoke from active furnaces. Flak intensified, black bursts appearing in clusters. The bomber jolted from a near miss. Then, bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly lighter by 5,000 pounds of ordnance. The formation banked left at 08:37 hours, exiting the target area. Sutherland felt the G-force pull as Lieutenant Morgan threw the bomber into a descending turn, trading altitude for speed. Behind them, secondary explosions bloomed orange and black, direct hits on the factory buildings. Reconnaissance photos would later confirm destruction of 2 assembly halls and damage to the machine shop, reducing production capacity by an estimated 40% for 3 months. But the mission wasn't complete. The formation still had to cross 150 miles of occupied France and the Channel, at reduced altitude, now 17,000 feet, to increase speed, and with scattered aircraft, they remained vulnerable. Sutherland's ammunition counter showed 36 rounds, enough for 1 burst, maybe 2. He watched 3 Bf-109s reform behind the formation, maintaining a distance of 2 miles, shadowing, waiting. At 08:43 they attacked, not head-on this time, but from the rear quarter, 6 o'clock high, classic Luftwaffe doctrine. The tail gunner engaged first, his twin 50 calibers hammering. 1 Bf-109 peeled off trailing smoke, the other 2 split, one diving below the formation, one climbing above. Sutherland tracked the diving fighter. It approached from 7 o'clock low. The angle he'd been trained to cover, range, 800 yards. He rotated the turret smoothly, elevated the guns, placed the reticle ahead of the target. This was a standard engagement. Familiar. He fired. 5-round burst. The Bf-109 jerked, rolled inverted, and dove away. Sutherland couldn't determine if he'd scored hits or if the pilot had broken off voluntarily. His guns clicked empty. Out of ammunition. He keyed the intercom. Ball turret Winchester. Military code. No rounds remaining. He was now a spectator, trapped in a plexiglass sphere beneath a damaged bomber. Defenseless. The waist gunners still had ammunition, as did the tail and top turret, but the belly was dark. For the next 40 minutes, Sutherland could only watch as the formation limped toward England. 2 more bombers fell, 1 to fighters, 1 to mechanical failure. At 09:17, the English coast appeared. White cliffs through haze. Sutherland exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The B-17 landed at RAF Molesworth at 09:52 hours, tires screeching on wet concrete. Sutherland waited for the turret to be manually rotated to exit position. The hydraulics had failed during descent, then crawled through the fuselage hatch. His legs barely supported him. 4 hours cramped in the turret had left muscles cramped and numb. He walked slowly toward the hardstand, where ground crews swarmed the aircraft. They counted holes, 73 punctures in the fuselage and wings, 1 engine destroyed, hydraulic lines severed, rudder cables damaged. The bomber was categorized as major battle damage, requiring 3 days of repair. In the debriefing room, intelligence officers recorded each crew member's account. When Sutherland described firing forward from the ball turret, the captain paused, pen hovering over the form. "Sergeant, clarify. You engaged enemy fighters from the belly turret in a forward-firing position?" Sutherland nodded. "Yes, sir. Rotated turret to forward stops, elevated guns approximately 65 degrees, engaged 2 aircraft making head-on attacks as they pulled up." The captain made notes. Results? 2 destroyed, observed by multiple crew members, both aircraft seen smoking and out of control. The captain underlined something. "We'll verify with other crews and gun camera footage, if available." The debriefing continued. Final tallies. The 303rd Bombardment Group had lost 5 bombers, 14% of the force, but destroyed an estimated 12 enemy fighters and successfully bombed the target, within acceptable parameters by the grim mathematics of strategic bombing. but Sutherland's tactic had been noted. Over the following week, intelligence officers interviewed him 3 more times. They asked about firing angles, sight picture, lead calculations. An armament officer visited to measure the ball turret's mechanical limits. On April 23rd, Sutherland was summoned to group headquarters. Colonel Reed sat behind a desk covered with mission reports and technical drawings. He gestured to a chair. "Sergeant, your innovation on the 15th has caught attention at VIII Bomber Command. They're evaluating its tactical application across all groups." The evaluation process moved through military channels with characteristic thoroughness. At Bushy Park, 8 Bomber Command headquarters, a working group assembled in early May 1943 to analyze defensive gunnery effectiveness. They compiled data from 247 combat missions flown since January, correlating fighter attack angles with bomber losses. The statistics were stark. 68% of successful Luftwaffe attacks came from forward angles, 12 o'clock, high, 12 o'clock level, 11 o'clock high. Traditional defensive doctrine concentrated firepower on beam and tail positions based on combat experience over Germany in 1942, when Bf 109s primarily attacked from the rear. But Luftwaffe tactics had evolved. Pilots discovered that head-on attacks minimized their exposure time to defensive fire and struck the bomber's most vulnerable area, the cockpit. The working group examined Sutherland's engagement method. Theoretical calculations showed that a ball turret gunner, by rotating forward and elevating guns to maximum, could create a cone of fire covering the 12 o'clock, low to 12 o'clock, level arc. It wasn't ideal. The sight picture was awkward. The bomber's nose blocked most forward vision, and ammunition expenditure would be high given the brief firing windows. But it provided coverage where none existed before. On May 15th, 8 Bomber Command issued Tactical Bulletin 1743, distributed to all bombardment groups. The bulletin described forward-firing defense from ventral turret positions as an approved tactic, noting that it may prove effective against head-on fighter attacks when other defensive measures are insufficient. The language was cautious, but the implication clear. Gunners were authorized to experiment. Training began immediately. At gunnery ranges across England, ball turret gunners practiced the technique on ground mock-ups and in flight against towed targets. The results varied. Some gunners found the body position too uncomfortable, the sight picture too restricted. Others adapted quickly. By June, combat reports showed increased implementation. Mission after mission, debriefing forms included entries. Ball turret engaged forward. Ventral turret successful head-on defense. The numbers supported the tactic. In June 1943, bomber losses to head-on attacks decreased by 22% compared to April, even as sortie rates increased. The innovation was spreading, but innovation carried costs beyond mathematics and tactical bulletins. On June 13, 1943, during a mission to Bremen, a ball turret gunner named Sergeant James Mitchell from the 91st Bombardment Group attempted a forward-firing engagement. He rotated his turret correctly, elevated the guns, acquired the target, but in the awkward forward position, his head pressed against the turret's plexiglass at the wrong angle. He couldn't clearly see the bomber formation around him. As he fired, his tracer stream intersected another B-17 flying 150 yards to the right. 3 rounds struck the other bomber's tail section, wounding the tail gunner. Mitchell realized his error immediately and ceased fire. Both bombers returned safely, but the incident highlighted the tactic's risks. At high closing speeds, with restricted visibility, the margin for error was razor thin. Feet. Bomber Command issued a supplementary bulletin on June 20th, emphasizing situational awareness. and limiting forward fire to clear threat situations. The guidance was necessary. By July, 38 ball turret gunners across 8 bombardment groups regularly employed forward-firing techniques. 3 friendly fire incidents had been reported, all minor, none fatal, but all preventable. The command staff debated pulling the authorization. In the end, they refined it instead. New procedures required co-pilot clearance before engaging forward targets, better coordination with top turret gunners who covered overlapping sectors, and mandatory recognition training to prevent misidentification. Sutherland, meanwhile, flew his remaining missions through August 1943. On his 35th sortie, his final mission before rotation back to the United States, he used the forward-firing technique twice, damaging one Bf-109 and driving off another. His total confirmed kills stood at 5 enemy aircraft, with 3 probables, respectable for a belly gunner whose primary role was defensive rather than offensive. After the war, analysts at Air University studied the 1943 campaign. They calculated that forward-firing defense, combined with improved formation tactics and long-range fighter escort, contributed to a cumulative 8% reduction in bomber losses during the critical summer months. 8% translated to approximately 112 bombers and 1,120 crewmen. Numbers in a report, Names on Memorial Walls. By 1944, the air war over Europe had transformed. The introduction of P-51 Mustang fighters with drop tanks provided bomber formations with continuous escort deep into Germany, fundamentally altering the tactical equation. Luftwaffe fighters, facing pressure from both bombers and escorts, could no longer loiter and choose optimal attack angles. Head-on attacks declined not because they were ineffective, but because German pilots lacked the opportunity. Ball turret gunners still trained in forward-firing techniques, but employed them less frequently. The tactic remained in doctrine, a tool available when needed, gradually overshadowed by evolving circumstances. Sutherland returned to the United States in September 1943, assigned to gunnery instruction at Fort Myers, Florida. He taught incoming aerial gunners the fundamentals, lead calculations, deflection angles, weapons maintenance. He mentioned the forward-firing technique in lectures, demonstrating the turret positions on training mock-ups, but emphasized it as a contingency method, not standard procedure. The students took notes. Some would use it in combat. Most would not need to. The strategic bombing campaign continued through 1944 and into 1945, a grinding calculus of tonnage and loss rates. The 8th Air Force flew 10,631 sorties in 1944, losing 2,118 bombers, a 20% attrition rate, sustained only through massive production and replacement. Each bomber carried 10 men, the numbers accumulated. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the final accounting began. The 8th Air Force had lost 4,154 bombers during the campaign, with approximately 43,000 casualties, but they had delivered 692,918 tons of bombs, destroyed German industrial capacity, and contributed decisively to Allied victory. Among the archived files was Tactical Bulletin 1743, one page among thousands, describing a belly gunner's innovation that had shifted defensive doctrine. Sutherland mustered out in November 1945 with the rank of technical sergeant. He returned to Billings, Montana, worked as a mechanic, married, raised 3 children. He seldom spoke about the war. When pressed by his son years later, he mentioned the missions, the cold, the noise. He didn't mention that he'd changed how American bombers defended themselves. It hadn't felt like innovation in the moment. It had felt like survival. In 1983, the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, compiled a comprehensive study of defensive air combat tactics from World War II. A researcher named Dr. Catherine Price, working through archived mission reports and tactical bulletins, identified the forward-firing ball turret technique as a significant but underappreciated development. She located Sutherland through veterans' records. He was 71, retired, living in the same house he'd purchased in 1946. She called him in March. He agreed to an interview. They met in his living room, a tape recorder on the coffee table. Dr. Price asked about the April 15th mission. Sutherland described it factually: the head-on attacks, the turret rotation, the firing angles. He remembered specific details: the smell of hydraulic fluid, the vibration through the gun grips, the way his neck cramped in the forward position. When Dr. Price asked why he'd violated standard procedure, Sutherland paused. It wasn't about violating anything. The manual said belly gunners cover the underside. But those fighters weren't attacking the underside. They were coming in head-on, and we were getting torn apart, so I adjusted, that's all. Dr. Price noted the modesty, the pragmatism, no claims of heroism or tactical brilliance, just adaptation under fire. She asked if he knew how widely the technique had been adopted. He didn't. She showed him the statistics, the reduced loss rates, the training bulletins, the post-war assessments. He studied the papers for a long time, silent. Finally, I didn't know. We just flew our missions and came home. Or didn't. The interview lasted 2 hours. Dr. Price thanked him, packed her recorder, drove back to Maxwell. Her study, published in 1984 in Air Power History Journal, dedicated 2 pages to Sutherland's contribution. Few people read it. The article sits in academic libraries, accessible to researchers who know where to look. Sutherland died in 1997, age 85. His obituary in the Billings Gazette mentioned his military service: VIII veteran, served with distinction, but no specifics. No mention of ball turrets or tactical innovations, just a life, fully lived, concluded. On April 15, 1943, at Rouleau rate 33 hours over. Lille, France, Staff Sergeant George H. Sutherland engaged enemy aircraft using a defensive technique that contradicted existing doctrine. His actions were recorded in the 303rd Bombardment Group's mission report, filed at the National Archives under Record Group 18, Box 447. The innovation spread through operational necessity rather than formal mandate, a bottom-up evolution characteristic of combat adaptation. By war's end, variations of forward-firing defense had been incorporated into gunnery training across all bomber commands, Atlantic and Pacific theaters. The technique never received official recognition beyond tactical bulletins. No medals were awarded for its development. No public acknowledgement was made. In the vast machinery of strategic bombing, it represented a small mechanical adjustment, one gunner's improvisation multiplied across hundreds of crews. The effect was measurable, but not decisive. Wars are won through accumulated marginal gains: better tactics, improved training, industrial production, courage under pressure. Sutherland's contribution was one thread in that larger fabric. The archival record preserves it. Mission reports, tactical bulletins, training documents, post-war analyses. The numbers are documented. Sorties flown, enemy aircraft engaged, loss rates reduced. What remains undocumented, impossible to quantify, is the private calculus each gunner made in that frozen turret, rotating forward into uncertain geometry, firing at targets that came too fast and left too quickly. The calculation wasn't about recognition or innovation. It was about bringing the crew home. On that measurement, within his own cockpit, Sutherland succeeded 35 times. The larger strategic impact, the lives saved by a tactic that spread across a bomber force, cannot be attributed to any single individual, but it began somewhere, with someone willing to adjust. When the situation demanded adjustment, the file closes without elaboration. The mission reports already contained what mattered. At 09:52 hours, aircraft 42-5277 landed safely at RAF Molesworth. 10 men disembarked. The next mission would launch in 36 hours.